Welcome to Industry Viewpoints, a video series brought to you by American Bankruptcy Institute. In our programs, we feature experts providing news and views on the current state of affairs of industries or key issues with a focus on what may lie ahead. Filmed here at ABI's Winter Leadership Conference, my guest on this special edition of Industry Viewpoints is Michael Eidelman from the Chicago office of Vedder Price. Michael is a partner and chairman of the firm's, I guess you call it, Bankruptcy and Corporate Reorganization Group.
Correct.
And Michael was one of the expert panelists at our program here in Los Angeles, looking at restructuring in the real estate industry. Well, Michael, with regard to restructurings and difficulties in real estate, I mean, my goodness, that's what we read about every day in our newspapers. For instance, the ABI headlines today, sent to you and every other ABI member, had two stories about real estate. One said that in terms of vacant mall space in America, it represents 16 of the, what's it called in Minneapolis?
The Mall of
Americas. 16 of those puppies represent the space that's unoccupied. And there's another story about a $350 million office project that's being torn down to become a warehouse distribution center. My goodness, talk about change. Good grief. But let me start off with something that I'm acutely interested in, because now that we're having programs again, I have to travel again, and I must admit, I've enjoyed not having to be on airplanes, but those days are over. But with regard to travel, is real estate related to travel all depressed, or are some parts of the travel industry in terms of real estate doing better than others?
So Bill, let's talk about what real estate and bankruptcy means, because most of the news is doom and gloom for obvious reasons.
Oh, well, it sells. I mean, that's one of the things I learned in my early days of journalism, is that if you write a story that says airplane lands safely, no one will read it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with real estate, there's so many different types of real estate that have been affected by COVID. We have healthcare related real estate, senior centers and that type of real estate. You have hospitality, you have retail, you have industrial. So it's really a multifaceted dilemma, and every different sector has its challenges, and it has its winners and its losers. With respect to the question that you asked, the travel portion, the travel sector, and leisure and business in particular are very, very different now than what they were. So for example, so business, because of Zoom or Microsoft Teams, people are able to transact business in a over the internet, and it's the new normal. It's now perfectly acceptable to hop on a Zoom call for an important meeting. Obviously, some meetings need to be in person, and if you need to fly to New York or you need to fly to Chicago, the statistics show that business travel is ticking up. It's not yet at pre-pandemic levels, but it's definitely ticking up. On the other hand, leisure travel has increased exponentially.
Really?
Yes.
No kidding.
Absolutely. So, there's certain things you can't recreate on a Zoom meeting, like if you wanted to take your wife to a museum, or if you wanted to go to New York to go see a Broadway show. You actually have to go. So now that COVID, at least in many parts of the world, is either over or, quite frankly, never existed.
Well, it existed, but they didn't want to admit it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. But obviously, certain areas of the country view COVID differently. You have the red states, blue states. You have the states that are warm in the winter versus the state, places like Chicago, which are cold. So people are, having been cooped up for so long, people want to get on an airplane. They feel comfortable. The airplanes are safer. The filtration systems are safer. Many people have been now triple vaxxed. And the news, about the variants seems to be, it seems to be a lot more tolerable to people, to the extent that there's a risk. People are willing to take that risk to go on a vacation.
Wow.
And people have money now too. Nobody spent any money in the last 18 months.
That's a good point.
So
That's a good
everyone's been sitting at home, and unless you remodeled your house, people haven't been going out to dinner. So people want to get out.
Well, let's focus in a little bit more, in a little more detail on some of these differences in the real estate markets. Are there some aspects of real estate that have not been so adversely affected by COVID?
So let me tell you an anecdote about a case that I just concluded. So I was appointed by the United States District Court for the Central District of California to be what's called a special master. I was appointed at the request of the Department of Justice, and I was appointed to sell a hotel in Beverly Hills called the L'Hermitage Hotel. The L'Hermitage is
Beverly Hills, fancy address.
Absolutely, and this hotel, to your point about it being a fancy address, it was literally referred to as a 6-star hotel, a term I had not yet,
Really?
I had not heard prior to my appointment.
Well, they probably tuck you in at night and stuff like
It's
that,
very, very nice. 116 rooms. It's got no event space, so there's no weddings there. There's no post-Oscar
Well, we
night.
don't want people coming in off the street
Yeah,
in our hotel.
it's a place to go where you don't want to be seen. It's tucked away in a neighborhood, and it's not the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons. And what we were tasked with selling the hotel during the pandemic. And this hotel emanated from a fraud called the 1MDB fraud, which is a multi-billion-dollar fraud that emanated from Malaysia. And what we had assumed as the sale process began, that the sale price was going to be severely discounted because we had 8 guests in the hotel, the restaurant was closed, the bar was closed, the pool was closed, there was no room service, there was no maid service, and we thought for certain that any buyer that came in was going to buy this at a discounted price.
A fire sale.
Correct. And what happened was, as we ran the sale process, through the usual channels of setting up a data room and interviewing bidders and trying to arrange site visits, sometimes electronically, literally having somebody walk through the hotel with their iPhone camera on. We had a number of challenges that way. We ended up receiving bids between, I think our lowest bid was $13 million, and our highest bid, the bid that we ultimately accepted, was $100 million.
Goodness gracious.
Right. So and again, so that was a price that was on the higher side of what we were anticipating.
Yeah.
So you could say in that instance that was COVID-proof. That property was COVID-proof, in part because of the location in Beverly Hills and the type of hotel that it was.
Well, I'll be darned. That shows you all real estate is not the same. Well, let's talk about your hometowns and mine, because you're in Chicago and I live in New York, and I walk down the street in New York, and it's probably the same in Chicago. There's a lot of vacant retail space.
Absolutely.
Used to be a restaurant, used to be a shop.
Right.
Lord only knows what it is. How are those landlords dealing with these situations? Are they giving breaks to new tenants, or what are they doing?
So before we talk about Chicago and New York, let me, just to put it in reference, I was on a panel this morning talking about real estate, and one of my panelists was a lawyer from Tampa. And in Tampa, the real estate market is hot. Restaurants can serve food outside. I wouldn't necessarily say hot like white hot, but there are not as many vacancies as what you're seeing in some other places, in part because it's Florida, in part because it's the warm weather, in part because it's a vacation destination, or at least the snowbirds are coming down.
And they have a good football team.
They do have a good football team. And but in Chicago, and less so in New York, because I do a fair amount of work in New York as well, but in Chicago, you have a spike in crime, you have COVID issues, you have a city and a state that is very COVID conscious in terms of vaccines and mandates and requirements and expectations of the people that live in that community. And in Chicago, it's crazy enough that the classic Chicago steakhouse, the one that serves the $60 steak, if you want to eat outside in the winter, you're eating in a small little greenhouse, that has a little table and a little heater, and you're spending, for that privilege, you're spending, $60 on your steak.
By the way, I don't know whether it was that steakhouse or another one, but the coldest I've ever been in my life, I was in Chicago on business. I had a marvelous steak restaurant, and I nearly froze to death. It was in January, walking back to my hotel.
Yeah, well, to go off topic for a moment, 2 years ago, the weatherman took a glass of water and threw it up in the air on the telecast, and you could see it turn to crystals before it dropped to the ground. So it could have been the same time.
Oh, I love that town.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that town. It's,
But the owners of the properties, you know, they may be facing some pressure from their lender, you know, the bank or finance company that has a mortgage on the property, because if you have a tenant and that's dark, you know, your property is no longer generating any income. And walking down Michigan Avenue, it feels like 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 4 stores is closed.
that's horrendous.
It's horrendous.
Well, that's worse than New York City.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
Really? No kidding.
Absolutely. And in the Loop, you know, the central
Yeah,
business district, a lot of the retail shops on the main floors of where the office workers are, you know, clothing stores, shoe shines, restaurants, many of them are dark.
Yeah, sure, because nobody's
Nobody's
coming
there.
to work.
That's correct.
Nobody's coming to work.
That's correct.
So, are you saying that landlords can be flexible or not with either new or existing tenants based upon the point of view of the lender? Is that?
Well, that's part of it. The other part of it, obviously, is the market. I mean, there's certain parts of Chicago where the landlord may have a little bit more flexibility based upon the neighborhood and based upon the tenants that are looking for space.
Yeah.
And in some places, there are just no spots for if you wanted to open up your business, for example, in the West Loop. Lots of restaurants, lots of activity, nice little boutique hotels. It's hard to find a spot there. You want to open up a restaurant on the Loop, you have your pick of 20 different locations.
Really? It's fascinating. Well, now let's look at it from the point of view of the owner or the holder of the mortgage or the loan on the property. I know I read, I don't know if it's true or not, that in the early days of the pandemic, when businesses were going out of business, right and left, that lenders were not pushing their, the owners or landlords were not pushing the tenants. They didn't want to take it back. I mean,
Right.
what the heck am I, it's an empty property if I'm
Right.
going to take, and that was a year ago. Is that kind of a notion still prevalent in the industry or not these days?
So what happened initially, once COVID hit, there was a lot of uncertainty in the market in terms of, when were people coming back and what did coming back look like in terms of, restaurants especially, because people were afraid to go out and sit in confined spaces. In response to that uncertainty, many state or local legislatures, put forth eviction-type moratoriums where you could not go into court and evict anybody.
Right.
So for a long time, lenders were working with the property owner to try to, because they knew they couldn't evict. That was not the exit strategy. You couldn't even make that threat. Most of those moratoriums burned off in October of this year, October of 2021. So now the question is now, what are we doing with these properties? But interestingly, while the lenders may have initially been thought about taking over the property, something else came into being, and that is the PPP money or other similar types of relief. So for example, there is relief that's targeted for nightclub owners and restaurants that's separate and apart from PPP, or the Main Street loans, where businesses have access to effectively free money. So what's happening now is that the same lenders that were worried about taking back the real estate because the mortgage loan wasn't being serviced, their borrower now has access to money. And if they don't have access to the PPP or the Main Street loans or the other similar types of relief, there are so many alternative lending sources that can be tapped to try to find money.
Really? What do you mean,
So,
alternate lending sources?
Finance companies, private equity, family offices,
You mean
wealthy individuals.
Not your traditional
Non-traditional,
mortgage
not
lenders.
traditional lenders. So in my practice, I represent primarily secured lenders. We are being refinanced, not necessarily at par, every case is different, but we're being refinanced out of our problem loans in a manner that is saving us time and money. So for example, we don't have to go through the foreclosure process and then have a sale on the courthouse steps where we're surely not going to receive
You're just going
value.
to take it back, yeah.
Exactly. So now what we're doing is we're looking to distressed debt purchasers to buy our loan, or family offices, or finance companies. They buy our loan, and then they're not as fatigued perhaps as the traditional existing lender, and then we go about just transferring the loan. It saves money with lawyers. It saves money on time, and the new lender will then work cooperatively with the borrower.
Now, do you think those, I'm going to call them non-traditional lenders, are going to hold that paper for a long time, or do you think they're going to offload it?
So
what's their business model?
Different lenders have different motives. So sometimes it's a loan-to-own kind of strategy where they take in, they foreclose, and they take over. But with real estate, especially now, that doesn't seem to me like to be an effective strategy.
Really?
Yeah, because if the current landowner doesn't have a tenant, or is facing winter with bills, or not making sure that pipes aren't freezing, or security, then why do I want to take over that business? This business isn't generating any revenue now.
And I can't do any better.
Not going to do any better, you would think. So a lot of times the lenders that are coming in now, maybe the money's a little bit more expensive, but they get the benefit of time because you have a non-fatigued lender that's willing to work with the borrower. And then you as the owner of the property says, yes, I know I have to spend more money with a non-traditional lender. The interest, the fees are going to be higher. But once this turns, because surely it will turn, we all know as bankruptcy lawyers that everything is cyclical, then I'll refinance this lender out.
Wow.
So you just keep the plate spinning.
You know, what you've described is the most extreme business cycle that certainly I've ever seen since I got into the bankruptcy world. This is astonishing.
Right. Well, if you think about it in the most jaundiced, pessimistic way, it's truly a parade of horribles. You have a global pandemic that has basically kept people at their houses until the vaccine came. Yeah. Then in many parts of the country, you have weather-related issues. You have spikes in crime where you're seeing flash mobs going into malls and stealing, handbags from big box retailers. You also have things like, Amazon and technology that has replaced the need to go out to a shopping mall.
So what do you mean replace?
So I have 3 grown adult children. Yeah. They don't go to the shopping mall. What they'll do is they'll go to Amazon. They may go to a store like a Costco or a Sam's Club, but everything they can buy on Amazon, they do. It's easy to return. Maybe there's no sales tax depending on where what store you're buying something from. So everything is very easy. It's delivered to your front door. And then with technology, unless you have to try it on, you know what you're buying. If you're buying toilet paper or paper towels, it's easy. There's no issue about it.
Well,
on top of it, you have the supply chain problem, which is preventing a lot of stores from having the inventory that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So again, it's a parade of horribles.
Well, I got to tell you, when it comes to try it on, that is no deterrence to my wife. She will order literally in the space of a week 10 items of clothing,
sure,
and send back 9 of them.
Of course.
Sometimes all 10 of them.
But exactly. But that goes to the point of how easy it is to return.
Right.
You go online, you print the return label, and it doesn't cost you anything.
And she's never a single time had a dispute.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Just puts it right back in the box, same day.
That's right.
It's gone.
And you see it right back on your credit card. These are not. There's nothing shady or difficult about it.
Well, I got to tell you, what this shows, if you can predict the future.
If we all had a crystal ball.
Pretty darn well.
Absolutely.
In real estate. Well, Michael, I got to tell you, this has been a fascinating conversation. I have loved every minute of it. I wish we had another 4 hours.
I agree.
To talk about it. But for folks out there in ABI land, you can come to our upcoming events and hear more of this. Because, as a matter of fact, real estate restructuring will be fodder for upcoming ABI events and publications. To find out what they are, just have a look at abi.org for the latest updates on our publications and events. And I thank you all for tuning in. In upcoming weeks, our Industry Viewpoints series, we will talk with other experts about the future of industries that are being affected by our turbulent economic times. Until then, be well, stay safe, and good day.